"She won't take the ship, Senator," the young messenger gasped, collapsing onto the marble floor, his lungs burning from the sprint from Ostia. "Lady Livia demands the immediate return of her father's signet ring, or she promises to send the ledger, the one detailing all legions bribed in the Eastern campaign, directly to the Pontifex Maximus before sunrise." The senator, usually unflappable, watched the message roll off the boy's tongue like hot oil. "Impossible. She is merely the wife of General Marcus. She obeys." The messenger shook his head, terror in his eyes. "No, sir. She is not running. She is waiting inside the Basilica Julia, and she said she knows precisely how the general truly lost his life." Senator Gaius Viridian was the embodiment of Rome's cold, unyielding ambition. Every morning began the same way. Before the sun cleared the Palatine Hill, he was already standing in his atrium, receiving the first tide of petitioners. He wore the purple stripe of his rank not as an adornment, but as a second skin. His household, though grand, ran with the silence and precision of a well-oiled siege engine. Today, he dictated correspondence regarding the distribution of grain subsidies in Sicily, while his personal attendant, a freedman named Hilarus, shaved him with a bronze razor. Every word was measured, every decree final. The praetor must understand that expediency must not override legality. "The law is the foundation, Hilarus, not the convenience of the moment," Gaius instructed, his voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of the curia itself. He signed the wax tablet with a decisive stroke, the seal pressing deep into the resin. He was the most powerful man in the Senate now, a master strategist who had weathered civil wars and imperial whims, always emerging cleaner and stronger. People respected him, feared him, and obeyed him implicitly. Yet, as Hilarus stepped back, preparing the oil for the senator's face, Gaius caught his reflection in the polished silver mirror. The face of power was etched with deep, almost invisible lines, not lines of age, but of constant, gnawing regret. He dismissed Hilarus with a curt nod and walked toward the Lararium, the small shrine dedicated to his household gods. His offering today was meager. A pinch of frankincense and a moment of silence dedicated not to Jupiter or Mars, but to his son, Quintus. Quintus had been everything Gaius was not: impulsive, brilliant, and hopelessly idealistic. 3 years ago, Quintus had been killed during the Dacian campaign, a campaign that Gaius himself had engineered, pushing General Marcus, Livia's husband, into the field against impossible odds to secure profitable trade routes for his allies. Gaius had ensured Quintus was placed in Marcus's legion, believing the general's rising star would shield his boy. Instead, it had drawn the lightning. The official report stated, Quintus lost his life valiantly defending a flank. The truth, whispered among the centurions who survived, was that Quintus had been expendable, a necessary sacrifice for Marcus's tactical brilliance to succeed. Gaius buried his grief beneath layers of legislation and political maneuvering, but the hollow space remained, cold and accusatory. He used his authority to reward Marcus publicly, even promoting him posthumously in the Senate, all while knowing he had sent his son to die for the profit of Rome and his own ambition. Now Marcus was dead too, reportedly from a sudden illness overseas, and his widow, Livia, was not just mourning. She was acting. Gaius ran a thumb over the polished bust of Quintus. Livia's sudden return, her outrageous demands, the mention of Marcus's death, and that devastating ledger. It was an earthquake beneath the marble floor of the Republic he so meticulously built. He had silenced every senator involved in the bribery, ensured the official records were pristine. He had neutralized every threat, except the quiet, grieving widow who had just demanded an audience in the public Basilica Julia, the heart of Roman law and finance. Why the Basilica? Why the public stage? Gaius felt a familiar surge of cold control. He had to know what she held. He adjusted his toga. The morning routine was over. The performance of power began. Faustina moved through the crowded forum like a ghost, her presence intentionally muted. She was an ostiarian, a doorkeeper and cleaner at the Basilica Julia, the massive complex that housed the Senate's administrative offices and courts. Her life was defined by scrubbing away the accumulated dirt and ambition of Rome's elite. Her tunic was threadbare, her hands permanently stained by lye and the grime of the city. She earned just enough to rent a single damp room near the Subura, a room she shared only with her absolute necessity, a small, silent clay jar. Faustina was not a Roman citizen, but a peregrina from Hispania, captured when her village resisted a local levy, and later freed by the generosity of a minor magistrate who quickly regretted the cost of maintenance. Her lack of citizenship was a perpetual muzzle. If she spoke out of turn, if she drew attention, she risked everything. Her limitations were vast. Her protection was thin. Yet her burden was not the cleaning or the relentless, exhausting hours. It was the secret she guarded inside that clay jar. Inside the jar were scrolls, meticulously copied in her own hand, transcripts of the whispered conversations she overheard while polishing the bronze statues in the Senate wing. She spoke flawless Latin, a skill she acquired during her servitude, and possessed an eidetic memory that catalogued every casual cruelty, every desperate political bargain. She did not transcribe the gossip of wives or the complaints of slaves. She transcribed the cold mathematics of corruption, names, dates, amounts, and locations of illicit transfers of wealth and power. She did this for a single reason. The scrolls contained proof that her younger brother, captured alongside her, was not, as the officials claimed, killed resisting arrest, but was sold into a mining camp in Dacia by a senator seeking to eliminate witnesses. That senator was Gaius Viridian. Faustina was tired, bone-weary from the constant vigilance required to remain invisible. Today, however, the fear was sharper. As she swept the atrium outside the senator's private meeting room, she noticed a detail that had been overlooked by every official. The ink on the travel warrant for General Marcus's fatal sea journey was too fresh, the scribe's hand too shaky for a routine dispatch. It wasn't signed after his reported illness, but clearly prepared before his death was confirmed. She knew Marcus had been compromised. She knew Viridian benefited from Marcus's loss of life. And she knew that Lady Livia, the general's widow, had spent the last 2 days, not in mourning but in the basilica, sitting silently in the most public section, receiving only coded messages from an unexpected source, a minor clerk from the treasury. Livia's quiet composure was not grief, it was calculation. Faustina realized the 2 deaths, Quintus, the senator's son, and General Marcus, were connected, parts of a much larger, darker transaction that Viridian was trying to erase. Livia knew the full extent of the senator's ledger, the one detailing the legions bribed. Faustina knew how the ledger was funded, with the illegal sale of prisoners, including her brother. She knew something terrible was coming, a public clash between a grieving, calculating woman and the most powerful man in Rome. She understood the true risk. Livia was holding a torch to the city, and Faustina was the only person with the map of the explosive tunnels beneath. "Where are you watching from today?" The air in the Basilica Julia was thick with the scent of beeswax and old paper. Gaius Viridian entered the structure, his retinue intentionally small. He moved slowly, acknowledging minor citizens with a nod, maintaining the facade of a man of impeccable duty, simply fulfilling an urgent request from a grieving family. He saw Livia immediately. She was not dressed in the traditional black of deep mourning, but in a severe iron-grey stola that seemed to absorb the light around her. She sat alone on a public bench near the central tribune, surrounded only by the noise of the ongoing legal arguments. Gaius kept his distance, circulating through the administrative area first, speaking briefly to the city prefect about tax matters, his eyes constantly tracking Livia. He observed the lack of guards, the absence of overt fear. This was not a woman preparing for flight, but one staking a claim. He recognized the strategy. She was using the very heart of the Republic, its open forum, its constant flow of witnesses, as her shield. Meanwhile, Faustina was waxing the mosaic floor near the section Livia had chosen. Her back was to the senator, her movements rhythmic and slow. She knew Gaius was near by the sudden sharp decrease in the volume of conversation. The fear he inspired was palpable. As she worked, she heard the delicate, almost imperceptible scrape of Livia's sandals against the marble. Livia was not moving, but her attention was absolute, focused entirely on the senator's slow advance. Faustina realized she was directly between the 2 forces. If Gaius approached, she would be trapped, a forgotten piece of furniture. She dropped her rag intentionally, bending low to retrieve it, giving her a moment to observe Livia's hands. They rested on a rolled scroll, seemingly unremarkable, tied with a simple piece of twine. But Faustina's memory flashed back to the previous night. She had seen that scroll before. It was wrapped exactly like the private ledger rolls stored deep within the treasury, scrolls that detailed the Empire's non-taxable assets. It was not the ledger detailing bribes which Livia had threatened, but something far more potent, proof of illegal state transactions, perhaps even involving the imperial treasury itself. Gaius finally reached a point where he could address Livia without seeming frantic. He paused, close enough for Faustina to feel the brush of his heavy toga against her arm as he passed. His voice, though low, carried absolute authority. "Lady Livia, this display is inappropriate. We can discuss your late husband's affairs privately at my domus," Gaius offered, his tone laced with practiced sympathy. Livia did not look up immediately. She simply smoothed the grey cloth over her knee. "The affairs of General Marcus are the affairs of Rome, Senator, and Rome is here." Faustina froze. The rag clutched in her hand. The refusal was cold, public, and absolute. Gaius took a calculated step closer, a move designed to intimidate. As he did, his foot slid slightly on the wax Faustina had just applied. It was a minor slip, immediately recovered, but it caused him to momentarily lose balance. In that half-second, Livia's eyes flickered, not to Gaius but directly to Faustina, the humble ostiaria, holding a dirty rag. It was a brief, sharp glance of mutual acknowledgement, a silent recognition that only the invisible can truly see the cracks in the foundation. Faustina understood. Livia knew the silent eyes were watching, and Livia was ready to use them. Something was about to break. The brief, loaded glance from Livia settled heavy in Faustina's stomach. It wasn't pity or recognition of her labor. It was the look of a commander assessing her resources. The powerful senator and the grieving widow were now locked in a silent contest, and Faustina was, momentarily, the fulcrum. Gaius recovered his balance, his dignity unruffled. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, meant only for Livia, but perfectly audible to the cleaner bent low at his feet. "Lady Livia, the ledger you speak of, the one related to the Eastern legions, is an ancient fabrication. If you release it, you will only discredit your husband's memory. Come, let us respect General Marcus's honor." Faustina knew Gaius was lying about the ledger's validity, but that wasn't the detail that snagged her attention. It was Livia's hands. As the senator spoke of respecting Marcus's honor, Livia's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the scroll, but they were trembling. Not from fear of the senator, but from something far more complex. She was rigid with control, yet the deep well of sadness in her eyes was momentarily replaced by a fleeting, profound look of hatred that was not directed at Gaius, but at the memory of Marcus himself. Faustina realized the terrible incoherence. Livia was using her husband's supposed memory as leverage, threatening to expose Gaius's bribery using evidence that Marcus likely compiled. But if Livia revered her husband, why the surge of deep-seated malice? Faustina risked a glance back at Gaius. He was calm, focused entirely on Livia's reaction to his threat of dishonor. His eyes were cold, assessing whether Livia's will would break under the strain of social ruin. He missed the hatred in her eyes, dismissing her agitation as mere feminine weakness under pressure. Everyone saw a widow fighting for her legacy. Faustina saw a woman fighting against a legacy. This was the ignored sign. Livia did not merely seek revenge on Gaius. She sought to dismantle something built by her own husband. If Livia used the bribery ledger against Gaius, the Senate would suffer a temporary scandal. But Gaius, the master of survival, would likely implicate Marcus posthumously, framing him as the initiator of the corruption, thereby protecting his own interests. Livia knew this. Her entire strategy, based on the ledger, was a sacrifice play that guaranteed her husband's lasting dishonor. Why would a widow choose certain public shame for her deceased husband merely to wound an enemy? Faustina's mind raced back to her own secret. Her brother, sold to the mines. General Marcus was in command of the legions that conducted those sales. Gaius signed the necessary waivers. Both men were complicit in the crimes against the vulnerable. If Livia was truly disgusted by Marcus's corruption, she would not threaten with a ledger that only caused temporary discomfort to Gaius. She would use something that destroyed the system that allowed the corruption. The truth about how Marcus operated. Faustina understood Livia's real leverage wasn't the scroll in her hand, but the knowledge she carried in her heart. The general hadn't just been bribed, he had been a brutal instrument of the powerful, complicit in far worse acts than tax evasion. If Livia hated Marcus, perhaps she was protecting herself from his dark history, not trying to avenge him. The only way Livia could truly win was by proving that Marcus's death was not the official, sudden illness, but something orchestrated to bury the full depth of his and Gaius's combined criminality. Faustina felt the icy dread. If she was right, Livia's confrontation would escalate from political blackmail to a public execution of reputation, and Rome would not forget the cleaner who saw the truth. She had to decide whether to remain invisible or use her tiny window of knowledge to change the outcome for her own sake and the memory of her brother. Gaius, sensing victory, took one last step, his shadow enveloping Livia. "You have until the final bell, Livia, to accept my offer of a discreet departure. Otherwise the Senate will view your actions as treason, influenced by irrational grief." Livia drew a sharp breath, ready to deliver her final damning reply, the one that would initiate the release of the fabricated ledger. Faustina knew this was the point of no return. Livia was about to choose the wrong, self-defeating lever. If Livia used the ledger, Gaius would survive, and the truth about the prisoners, about her brother, would remain buried forever. The fate of hundreds depended on this next minute. With a sudden, decisive motion, Faustina dropped her bronze water bucket. It clattered loudly on the mosaic, the water splashing across the meticulously polished floor, creating a chaotic interruption in the hushed intensity of the standoff. Gaius immediately turned, his face a mask of cold fury at the disruption. "Clean this mess, slave, before I have you whipped," he hissed, forgetting his public veneer. Faustina ignored the order. She knelt quickly in the puddle, not to clean but to draw. With her finger dipped in the muddy water, she sketched 3 precise symbols onto the pale marble floor, right at the edge of the senator's polished shoe. They were not words, but a rapid, almost indecipherable combination of Greek numbers and Latin military signs she had transcribed from the senator's private documents, 3 Aftu Thi P, the sign for the 3rd cohort, 12th Legion, and the code for pecunia, funds. It was the specific identifier for the prisoner sales conducted in Dacia, the transaction that had taken her brother. It was a blatant act of defiance, a visual accusation made right beneath the feet of the most powerful man in Rome. Livia, however, saw it. Her eyes, still focused on the ground, caught the swift movement, the shape of the water symbols. Livia was a general's wife. She understood military notation instantly. The fear drained from Livia's face, replaced by a searing clarity. This was not about Marcus's bribery. This was about the source of the bribe money, the illegal sale of human beings orchestrated by Marcus and sanctioned by Gaius. The humble cleaner knew the secret that would truly break the senator's power. Gaius, seeing only the spilled water and the kneeling cleaner, raised his arm ready to strike. I said, "Silence," but Livia moved first. She rose, letting the fraudulent ledger scroll slip from her hand, unimportant now. Her voice, no longer trembling with the fragile emotion of a widow, cut across the basilica, clear and utterly lethal. "Senator Viridian, I see you are quick to punish a servant for a splash of water, but you seem blind to the blood on your own hands. You did not send my husband to Dacia for the trade routes, did you? You sent him to retrieve the evidence he held of your black market trade in provincials, utilizing the 3rd cohort." The immediate consequence was terrifying. Gaius's arm dropped. The blood drained from his face, leaving the purple stripe of his toga looking garish. Livia had pivoted, not to the bribery but to the illegal human trafficking. This was a capital crime, not a political scandal. Faustina, still kneeling, felt the crushing silence of the basilica, the complete shift in the atmosphere. The confrontation was no longer about an embarrassing political leak. It was about murder, corruption, and the integrity of the legions themselves. The story had just changed direction completely. The name of the third cohort hung in the air, a physical pressure. Gaius Viridian felt the carefully constructed walls of his authority crack. He looked at Livia, then down at the wet symbols on the floor, the 3 Funda P. It was an arcane, specific detail that only the highest echelon of the supply chain would ever know. It was proof of the secret agreement he had struck with Marcus, trading state prisoners for personal wealth. He had believed that only he, Marcus, and the single scribe who handled the records knew this code. His immediate, chilling realization was that Livia did not merely threaten him, she possessed the mechanism of his destruction. But the question remained, how did she get the code? He scanned the area, his eyes moving past Livia and settling inevitably on the kneeling cleaner. Faustina, her eyes lowered, was now frantically trying to wipe the symbols away with her damp rag, but the gesture was too late, too obvious. "Seize her," Gaius commanded, his voice barely a rasp. His personal guards, veterans of countless covert operations, moved instantly toward Faustina. Livia stepped forward, blocking their path. Her calm was terrifying. "Do not touch the cleaner, Senator. She merely spilled water. If you seize her here in the Basilica, before witnesses, you confirm my accusation. You confirm that you fear the truth she represents." Gaius knew she was right. To arrest an innocent servant in the very space of law suggested desperation. But he was in a true mode of urgency. If Livia had this information, she had more. And if this Peregrina had witnessed the code, she was a repository of dangerous truth. He dismissed his guards with a tense flick of his wrist. He needed to isolate Livia and, more importantly, neutralize the cleaner, quietly, efficiently. He needed confirmation of what Livia actually possessed. "Very well," Gaius said, turning his focus entirely onto Livia. He adopted the tone of a worried patron. "Let us assume for a moment that my late friend Marcus engaged in such despicable dealings without my knowledge. What is your ultimate demand, Livia? The Senate can ensure your family's future, your comfort, your honor, if you cease this public theater." Livia shook her head slowly. "My demand is simple, Senator. Tell me exactly how General Marcus truly lost his life. The ledger detailing the Legion bribes was my husband's shield, but the information about the prisoners, the third cohort, was the weapon I needed to force the truth from you." Gaius swallowed hard, recognizing the perfect trap. Marcus was not killed by illness. He was eliminated by Gaius's agents when he threatened to expose the prisoner scheme to gain greater leverage in Rome. Gaius had to choose: confess to murder to stop the exposure of mass corruption, or deny everything and risk Livia revealing all the evidence she claimed to hold. He looked back at Faustina, who was now slowly retreating toward a side exit, clinging to her clay jar of scrolls. He had to act on 2 fronts. The immediate threat was Livia, but the enduring danger was the quiet witness. Gaius decided to eliminate the evidence first. "Guards," he commanded, his voice sharp and low. "Follow the Ostiaria, discreetly. She carries something that belongs to the Senate archives. Retrieve it and bring it to my domus, and do not let her reach the city gates." The clock was ticking. If Livia exposed him now, the Emperor would hear of it by nightfall. As the senator's agents slipped away, melting into the crowd to pursue Faustina, Gaius fixed his gaze on Livia, a man cornered. The public noise of the Basilica faded. It was just the 2 of them now, facing off over years of buried crimes. Marcus was ill, Gaius stated, his composure returning, though his eyes were frantic. He was weak, and the climate did not agree with him. Livia laughed, a single sharp sound that held no humor. "Weak? General Marcus was a lion, Senator. He was the tool you used to conduct your filth, and when he decided to keep a share of the harvest for himself and return to Rome with the proof, you poisoned his wine on the ship returning from Ephesus. The captain of the ship, Quintus, reported to me everything before you silenced him too." Gaius flinched at the mention of the ship's captain. Livia had witnesses. "You lie. You seek to destroy me for some trivial gain." "Trivial gain?" Livia's voice hardened, her control breaking just enough to reveal raw pain. "Marcus did not just traffic people, Senator. He trafficked children. And when your idealistic son, Quintus, discovered the trade routes of the third cohort, When he refused to stand aside and threatened to expose both his general and his father, you allowed Marcus to silence him in battle, framing his loss of life as a noble sacrifice. Marcus did not kill your son, Gaius. He merely took the opportunity you tacitly provided. The air left Gaius's lungs. The lie he had lived for 3 years, the constructed narrative of his son's heroic loss, shattered instantly. He realized Livia was not guessing. She knew the exact moment his ambition had cost him his child. He had sent Marcus to his death for betraying him, but he had shielded Marcus for the murder of Quintus, believing the general had acted alone to cover his crimes. Now Livia revealed the truth. Gaius's maneuvering had given the general the perfect chance to dispose of the only witness to his crimes, the senator's own blood. "No," Gaius whispered, the word hollow, stripped of authority. Quintus fought bravely. He was honored. "He was murdered because he possessed honor, a quality neither you nor my husband ever had," Livia countered, her voice ringing with the tragic clarity of final understanding. "I am not seeking revenge for Marcus, Senator. I am seeking justice for Quintus, the boy who died trying to stop the prisoner trade, the boy whose memory you defiled with your praise. I only wish to know if you had the courage to admit you sent your own son to a battlefield execution to protect your deals. Now I know you do not." Gaius staggered back, physically recoiling from the immense emotional weight of the accusation. He had spent his life controlling information, weaving narratives. Now, a woman he underestimated had ripped the tapestry apart, exposing the heart of his tragedy. He hadn't just lost a son. He had indirectly sanctioned his murder to protect his reputation and his alliances. The power he cherished was meaningless. The human cost was absolute. The confession, though silent, was written clearly on Gaius's face. The Senate officials watching from the periphery could not hear the words, but they witnessed the mighty senator crumble under Livia's steady, accusing stare. The game was over. Livia did not wait for the inevitable collapse of the senator. She had her truth. She turned and walked out of the Basilica Julia, leaving the shattered senator in her wake. Her consequence was immediate. She had exchanged her comfortable life as a general's widow for an uncertain future, but she walked with the terrible dignity of a woman who had finally avenged an innocent, even at the cost of her own stability. Rome would brand her a controversial figure, but the power she had just seized was moral, not political. Meanwhile, Faustina was running. The senator's 2 elite agents, trained to move silently, were gaining ground on her as she twisted through the narrow, garbage-strewn alleys leading toward the river Tiber. She knew their objective was simple: retrieve the clay jar and eliminate the witness. She couldn't outrun them. Reaching a dead end near the bustling port, she faced the stone wall. The agents closed in, their faces grim. "The jar, woman." "Give it to us now," one ordered, his hand reaching for his blade. Faustina knew the physical scrolls within the jar were heavy, brittle, and easily destroyed. The truth was not in the clay, but in her memory. She held the jar high above her head, met the agent's eyes, and then brought the clay vessel down with all her strength onto the rough cobblestones. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. The scrolls, dried and fragile, scattered briefly, uselessly, before being trodden underfoot by the approaching agents. "Fool!" the second agent spat, kicking the fragments away. They had failed their primary mission, but they still had the secondary, the witness. They moved toward her, intent on silence, but the commotion had drawn the attention of a group of dock workers, hard men of the port, overseen by a watchful, grizzled tribune who handled the transport manifests. Faustina, breathing hard, pointed at the fleeing fragments of the scrolls. "The senator sought to destroy my proof," she cried out, her voice loud and desperate. "Proof of the prisoner sales, the children taken from Dacia, sold for gold to fund his career. My brother was one of them. These men serve him." The dock workers, many of them provincials themselves, understood the brutal reality of the distant slave mines. They surrounded the senator's agents, blocking their exit. The tribune, smelling deep political corruption and a potential riot, hesitated only a moment before whistling for the watch. The agents, trained for covert killing, not public confrontation, realized they were exposed. They melted away, losing their anonymity and their opportunity. Faustina stood among the debris, physically unharmed but utterly exposed. She had lost her anonymity, her primary defense, and the hard copies of her evidence, but the truth was out. The price of her courage was the loss of her protected, invisible life. In the basilica, Gaius did not recover. He remained frozen, facing the spot where Livia had stood. When he finally walked out, the man who left the basilica was not a senator, but a ghost. The rumors of his connection to the prisoner trade, fanned by Livia's confrontation and Faustina's public cry, would spread faster than plague. He had survived many political storms, but the revelation of his son's true loss, tied directly to his own avarice, had fractured his will. He was destined for a slow, agonizing public fall, a consequence far worse than a quick execution. Weeks passed. The fallout from the basilica confrontation was not a swift, clean purge, but a drawn-out political bleeding. The emperor, wary of the Senate's power and the growing scandal, did not arrest Gaius but stripped him of his provincial governorships and committee posts. Gaius Viridian was confined to Rome, condemned to watch his influence wither daily, haunted by the spectre of Quintus. He had gained the highest office by ruthless action and lost everything when the deepest human truth was exposed. Livia, having exhausted her leverage, took the remaining portion of her family's non-tainted fortune and departed for her ancestral estates in Campania. She did not seek public office or further revenge. She sought only quiet anonymity, having paid the necessary price, the destruction of her husband's reputation, to avenge the honorable young soldier who had tried to save lives. Her hope lay in the simple, quiet act of planting olive trees on land where no blood was shed for profit. Faustina's life changed irrevocably. She could not return to the basilica. The senator's lingering influence made her a target. She spent her nights hidden in a safe house provided by the sympathetic tribune from the docks. She was exposed, but she was no longer invisible. The crowd that had witnessed her courage ensured her story reached the ears of those seeking to reform the system. One cold morning, Faustina was summoned. She was brought before a newly formed imperial commission tasked with investigating the logistics of the Dacian legions, specifically concerning the prisoner reports. She had no scrolls, no physical proof left. All she carried was her precise, terrifying memory. She spoke for 5 hours, recounting every name, every date, every specific numerical code, including the 3P. She detailed the fate of the prisoners, the collusion between General Marcus and Senator Gaius, and the exact moment Quintus, the senator's son, discovered the trade. She gave them not just evidence of crime, but the names of those still implicated. She wasn't just a former cleaner. She was the living, breathing archive of Rome's institutional cruelty. The immediate result was the release of a small contingent of captured provincials, her brother among them, recovered from the remote Dacian camps after the commission followed Faustina's precise directions. Her brother was malnourished and broken, but alive. Faustina never regained wealth or status. She took a small, legitimate post with the new commission, her incredible memory now serving the state, tracking logistics to ensure that the laws regarding prisoners and citizens alike were enforced. She was a check on the powerful, a silent guardian of the bureaucracy she once cleaned. She still wore simple clothes, but she walked with the straight spine of a woman who had faced the empire's greatest power and prevailed, not with a sword or title, but with the dignity of memory. She was no longer defined by her fear, but by the courage of her truth. Her hope was not for luxury, but for the safety of her brother and the establishment of true, impartial law. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more intense tales of the Roman Empire like this one.